product. It's freeze-dried, it's aseptically processed, minimally manipulated, and it's highly variable because it comes from all kinds of donors and there's not a lot of choice there. Artea has the same regenerative mechanism of action that I just described to you. We have all the data to demonstrate that. It just has a brief slides in this particular panel to show it. It is regulated as a medical device. It is a porcine source. Its handling is designed specifically for breast reconstruction. We work with breast reconstruction surgeons who do these procedures to develop, including Scott, to develop those properties for this material. And you can see them kind of closely matching alloderm in the bottom right. So it'll be more uniform and more consistent than what you see today with alloderm. So I think with that, I can stop and take any questions.
At the beginning, when we started using alloderm, no one was mentioning too much the fact that we needed to rinse it off, preservatives or something, and we had the red breast, phenomena. Was it related to that or not, or ready to use is different, but
I'll share the answer, I guess, with Scott, because I think probably everybody thinks about red breast a little differently. I do think that there's something. I don't think everybody's nailed down definitively what it is that causes red breast. And I do think that it's possible, and I've heard it probably enough anecdote to say that it can be related to residuals of the preservative solutions, whether it's in the freeze-dried formulation or in the Artea formulation.
Because I see less and less. I mean, the first 2 years, I've taken out implants because I was, sure that there's some, dormant infection there. But yeah.
So I actually, even with RTU, I will soak it for the entire time the mastectomy is going on. And if you look at the fluid afterward, it looks kind of turbid, and there are some preservatives that come out. And years ago, when I was getting some better results than some of my colleagues, I broke down the procedure, and this is one of the things that I was doing differently. So more and more people are starting to do that now and soaking it for a prolonged period of time.
So I just add, I guess, it's about robustness to the patient. The biggest variable in all of this, despite the variability of alloderm, is the patient variability. So, some are going to be more sensitive to others. We've demonstrated the safety of the solutions, and it's not a safety issue, but you may have patients that are sensitive, and then, the more you soak it, the less you're going to have an issue.
So you soak RTU also?
I soak it.
Prolonged soaking?
Prolonged.
How prolonged? 30,
I
40 minutes?
put it in when they start the mastectomy, and I take it out when I'm ready to use it during the
And
kid.
you don't get the alloderm to become this flimsy, it has all these small, hairball look that comes out of this, out of the sheet. After it's soaked in water, it's not as soft. It gets all these small.
No.
No?
No, I've never seen that. I don't know. I'm not quite sure what you're to do, because I think it looks fine. I think it looks the same. The only thing I think you're wiping off some of the preservatives. I've not seen it change, if that's what you're suggesting.
It changed the matter that it's not as smooth. It has these, not fibers, but it has
Well,
these small.
it has what we refer to as pock marks on the deep dermal side.
Yeah.
And those may become more prevalent, I guess. But,
what's the fate? What's the fate of a non-take alloderm, like floating in the pocket? What will happen there?
What will happen biologically there, or what should you do clinically in that case?
Can we call that necrosis? Can we call it degradation? And any issues about it? Any data about that?
So I'll just give you my brief science piece, and then Scott probably want to chime in. But I think, Scott talked about if you don't get good hand and glove fit, so if you're not adjacent to tissue, you can't have the kind of result I showed with regeneration. There's no way to get that repopulated, and there's fluid in case it. No.
That's the technical issues.
What would happen over time if you're sitting in that fluid, since it's a collagen matrix now in the body with sort of the milieu of enzymes that are there, is it eventually will get broken down and disappear if you didn't do anything. So it still should not be pro-inflammatory. The molecules are the same, everything's the same, but it's not going to achieve the results that you're looking for. So Scott, if you want to add to that.
So the only time I've seen it sort of free-floating would be in an infection, and then I would just take it out. There have been times where like a corner is sort of flipped down and I've just pushed it back up, and they do fine. I have not cut it out.
Okay, let's start with the questions. Okay. I would like to say something. I mean, the first question was the size of the sheet in relation to the size of the implant, but I do it completely different than you do it. First of all, I do most of my cases direct to implant, about, I would say, 95% of them. And I used, over the last few years, more than 450 alloderms in private practice, and more of them in the hospital, in general hospital. So I have some experience with that. I do perforation on all of them. I do perforate all of them. And I do the perforation in several directions, not in one direction like you perforate skin graft, because I want elasticity on the longitudinal different than the elasticity on the transverse. And then I use the square alloderm, I take off the corner, and I use the corner on the line that the implant is the bigger. I mean where the circumference of the, I use mostly high projection anatomical implants. So the most of the projection is in the center. I use that triangle and add it to the alloderm there to get more lengthening, so I have less pressure there. And so I guess my experience with size versus implant versus alloderm will be different than your experience, because I do it differently.
Do you have contour available here in Israel? You do. So actually, I only use contours now since
The
they came
contour,
out.
I don't have the corner. I need the corner. I use it. I don't want it to be thrown away. I use the corners because you show also that you have it like contour.
Well, no, this was not contour. What
Yeah,
I
but
showed here was
anyhow, it
was
looks
a
like
4
an
by 6.
ellipse. It looks like a sort of ellipse.
No, that was a rectangle piece of alloderm you saw there.
But when you suture it in, it looks like
It
an
eventually looks
elongate.
like that, right.
Eventually, yeah. So either you fold it down, which I don't think it's good because sometimes it misleads the rentgenologist. They see it like a lump, or you take it off. So I use it. Why throw it away? That's why I don't use the formed one. And what I found that up to about size of 400 cc, I use the 12 by 6 centimeter, and I can get a very good result with that. And above that, I use the 16 by 8, and I always have full coverage of the implant. The only drawback of the perforation I do on some thin skin patient, like a year later, you can palpate the perforation. They don't fill up.
With or without the serratus?
I use the serratus as well. I use serratus or whatever is there on the lateral corner.
But you elevate
So-
it for the lateral?
Yeah, I elevate the
coverage?
serratus.
So there are plenty of surgeons who are perforating the alloderm.
I know.
I have reservations about perforating. I don't think you really know what you're doing. We have perforated alloderm now. Is that available here too?
Yes, not yet, but it's.
Okay, so there's generated perforated alloderm.
Yeah, but the perforate alloderm is like skin graft. You know, in the machine that you grab,
No, it's
you
not.
mesh
It's
skin.
actually not. It's actually holes which have been designed based on surgeon preference and where they want the holes
Holes,
to be.
round holes.
If you look at the histology on the perforated, you get scar tissue, you get capsule in the interstices where there's no alloderm. So the fact that you're telling me that it's palpable,
It's palpable.
I never palpate alloderm.
It's palpable.
Yeah. So I mean that's probably why you're getting palpability.
I mean, I
Yeah.
did quite a few.
Right.
On thin skin patients, it's palpable.
Right. So I mean I don't see that. I don't perforate. I haven't seen the need to perforate. But that said, I mean surgeons are perforating, and I think if that's what you want. Now most of the surgeons that are perforated in the U.S. are perforating because they want the fluid to flow back and forth, and they're concerned about that.
Especially if you leave one vein.
I always leave one
The
vein.
movement of the fluid from around the
Okay.
implant to
Right.
the area.
How do you get more seroma since you leave draining only one space, the superficial space to the pectoralis?
I haven't seen it. I just haven't seen it because you're expanding that expander to such a degree that you're not leaving any room for fluid, and I don't particularly believe that when you suture that alloderm in place, you're creating a watertight seal right away. That probably takes some time.
That's even with the pamphlet. The insert says put 2 drains, one above and one under. The alloderm insert.
The IFU?
Yeah. The insert inside the package.
I don't know the IFU in Israel. The IFU in the United States doesn't say that.
It's in English. I don't think they change it. I don't think
They can speak to that, I don't know if.
I don't think they change it, but it
How
says.
long do you leave
Huh?
the drain?
But in off-label use, that would be an off-label use, which is
Okay.
not a problem.
How long do you leave the drain?
So I leave, I'm gonna talk about this if you come into the meeting, I have a long talk on drains in Seroma, but I leave the drain until it's less than 30 cc's a day. I have left drains in place 5 weeks.
And antibiotics.
But, I'm sorry,
Antibiotics.
you gotta come to my talk tomorrow. This is all I know.
I used to leave drain very long, and now usually I remove the drain by 25 cc per 24
Right.
hours, but some of them used to have seromas later.
So if
But in the last 2 or 3 years, what I'm doing, I refer the patient to a lymphatic massage, and it's helped tremendously. I almost don't evacuate any seromas now. They just go away.
So if I'm doing a tissue expander, it's easy, because at 2 weeks, that's usually when I start to expand.
You can
I'll
expand
expand
it,
with
yeah.
the drain in place, and then it comes out.
But
really
I
quickly.
have
I have found over time that my drainage is less, and that, they come out about 2 to 3 weeks now. And I'd say that it's probably technique related, more than anything.
Did you try to put some tissue glue or something like that to?
I have not. I use that, that's a whole other thing. I use what's called Evasil. I don't know if you have it here, in the abdominal wall when I do post-bariatric body contouring. That's another decision. I've never used it here because I was always afraid that it might interfere with the repopulation and the incorporation. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
First of all, I must agree with what Dr. Kaplan said about the lymphatic massage. It really helps a lot. My question would be, well, I don't know, I saw that you don't have a lot of experience with it. It's all about the flat necrosis. What do you do when you have wound dehiscence, flat necrosis? When do you decide to debride it? When will you just put a few stitches in the clinic? When will you take her back to the...
You all come in the meeting tomorrow, I hope, because you're all asking the questions in my talk tomorrow. But in any case, the example I'll give tomorrow in my talk is that it's Friday afternoon. Well, here you work, it's Friday afternoon in the States. We don't work Saturday, Sunday. Here you have a different work schedule. It's Friday afternoon and it's 5 o'clock and your car is waiting to drive to the Hamptons, right? Right, to the synagogue, right? And your last patient is the patient you did on Monday, and she has a big eschar across or maybe 2/3 of the incision, and what to do. And your instinct is to tell them, let's put some Silvadene or something on it, and I'll see you on Monday in the office, right? And the reality is, what I do is I take the person to the operating room, or if I could do it in the office, then I debride it and reclose it. Maybe taking something out of the expander, something like that. Because I'm concerned that what inevitably will happen is Monday I'll be looking at either alloderm, pec muscle, or the expander. So I take them back right away. And if I have a dehiscence where I'm looking at alloderm or pec muscle, I take them back right away. And if I have a dehiscence that I'm looking at an implant or a tissue expander, I take them back right away because I want to get a seal sooner rather than later. The idea of leaving a wound open and hoping that it granulates and you don't infect the implant expander, I think is not the way to go.
Can we maybe open this question to the crowd? How many people will take out an open wound like right away to the operating room versus like wait, I don't know, a week? Let's say you have a wound and you see the alloderm. Very clear cut.
At what point in time also, that makes a difference.
A week later.
From my experience, alloderm doesn't resist exposure unless you keep it wet all the time. Alloderm is like a foreign body at that stage, and you have to get rid of it. You have to close the wound as soon as you can. If you can't, remove the alloderm, remove the implant, and go to plan B.
If you have alloderm with incisions, then you have exposed.
I will tell you, take alloderm out of the equation. If I had a full muscle coverage patient and I had a wound dehiscence and I was looking at the pec muscle, I would still take that patient in the operating room. Because there's nothing, watertight, organism tight, that exposure is not going to get to the implant or the tissue.
But it seems, in my experience, that alloderm do have some protective on these cases when you have a little necrosis and a little bit wound healing. Without the alloderm, it would go to infection immediately. You would have to take out the implants. What I can see that I managed to salvage some of them with exposure, secondary suturing, with lavage, and I did succeed. And I think the alloderm does something there, and maybe the blood supply.
It definitely, I mean, listen, it's an extra barrier between you and the implant. It probably is, you know, right. Well, right.
Yes,
Yeah.
but as Dr. Kaplan said, when there is a alloderm exposed, when you do debridement in the OR, I do take wherever alloderm is in.
I will just wash it out. I won't debride the alloderm. The only thing I'll debride are the breast flap skin edges and then close it.
I'd like to ask a question about the tissue expander. I spent 16 years in the States, and I did a lot of tissue expander, and since I moved to Israel, I had to reshape my practice to direct implants, because that's what happens here. Do you feel that by using the alloderm, you are able to expand faster the...
Oh, no question. That's one of the benefits. I should have played it up more, maybe my conclusion. No question. If you look at the number of expansions, when I was doing total muscle coverage versus alloderm, it was probably 5, maybe 6 total muscle. Now it's like between 1 and 2, somewhere there with alloderm. The other thing I think that makes it conducive to direct implant is, you can take a huge piece. I don't use big pieces in my, and again, this is another one of my talks I'll be talking about tomorrow, but in terms of cost, and they probably don't want me to say this, but, I think cost is a huge factor we're going to have to consider moving forward. And I think that, alloderm is important enough to justify the cost. But if I could do, if I'm doing a tissue expander and I do one more expansion because I used a slightly smaller piece, that's fine. But the fact that you have alloderm and you can control that pocket, that's what has made direct implant what it is. Without that, direct implant in a full muscle coverage or in partial muscle coverage was not a great operation.
My assessment was that probably the alloderm, because it gets stuck to the skin, doesn't allow the skin to shrink so fast. So we can take advantage with the expansion a little bit faster.
Yes, no question. No question, absolutely.
I wanted to ask maybe a question about in cosmetics, maybe just to shift. Do you use alloderm for cosmetic?
Yes. Another talk I have, I'm actually not giving that one. But I use it on revision augmentation all the time. And I get sent a lot of patients because of it. And what it is the classic cases that you use it for bottoming out, inframammary fold malposition, and things like that. I have in Brooklyn, not far from me, there's a surgeon that does a lot of tuba, transumbilical. And that's a brutal operation. Have you ever seen one? It's like, you don't know where you're putting the implant, you don't know what tissue plane you're in, and they come to me because they look horrible. And a lot of those patients I end up using because the tissues have the inframammary fold's been destroyed and things like that. And I think this allows you, just almost the same technique, allows you to put the inframammary fold where you want it and support an implant. So I use it a lot. Other thing I'll address is rippling. We all see rippling. Anybody who says they don't see rippling says it's not. If you don't see rippling, you're not doing enough, because you're going to see rippling even with the form stable implants.
Does the insurance cover this?
No. For aesthetic, no. I think rippling is a pocket problem. I don't think it's necessarily a thickness problem. I think it's that what I've done, and I was in the mentor study for their CPGs for about 10 years, and so I make my pockets for implants just the size of the implant, and if I'm going to err, I make it smaller. Because I think that pocket over time expands slightly. And when it expands, that capsule falls into the natural scallops of the implant, and that's when you get rippling. So when I go back sometimes for rippling, I will tighten the pocket with a piece of alloderm. Sometimes I use Stratus.
Do you see rippling on reconstructive cases?
Not as much, not nearly as much, but that's not, that's to be expected because of the capsule is, a thicker capsule and things like that. But you see sometimes, sure. Sometimes in those cases, again, another topic for another talk, I'll use fat grafting too.
Do you have an experience with alloderm or Stratis as a sling for ptotic breast, especially in very young patients, like teenagers that have a very ptotic?
So the only place I really have it for that is in the post-bariatric breast, where that sort of elasticity is all gone, and I'll use it there for augmentation mastopexy. Because I think that the elasticity is not going to hold a good-sized implant, which a lot of these patients need because they simply have no breast tissue anymore. And their skin is gone, and all their tissues are sort of No,
How
not
do you
good.
suture this, to the ribs, or how do you?
No, I'll suture to the chest wall, not to the ribs, but to the serratus inferiorly, and I'll take the pec, and I'll put it put the implant below the pec, and then I'll do a mastopexy on top.
Scott, when you talk about the revisions, we go back to the question of the revisions. Basically, when you, like you said, you're going to, on your way to the Hamptons and you see this black skin that is going to fall off, and you say you have an exposed alloderm. So you take her back in the office. What do you do with the alloderm that basically was exposed? So when you open up, you see that some of the alloderm, of course, is stick to the skin, which is a good take.
So the nice thing about an eschar is you haven't gotten exposure yet. So I think it's fine. I take the eschar out, I get back to a nice bleeding edge, and I irrigate the hell out of it, like, 3 to 6 liters if I need to. And then I close it, usually over a drain. If the alloderm is just exposed and it hasn't been a long time, I'll do the same thing. I'll rarely resect alloderm because I'm pretty comfortable with the fact that it's going to regenerate even if it's had a slight exposure.
Do you exchange the implant, or in the situation you don't
Not
have-
unless the implant was exposed. If the implant's exposed, then the implant's coming out. Robbie Pearl from Stanford wrote papers, many years ago on, salvage of an exposed implant. And he had about a 50% save rate. I think it's probably even better today because of the techniques that we use, but it has to be exchanged. That implant exposed is infected, or colonized, and got to be exchanged.
In cases of radiated patients that received post-mastectomy radiation, you had amazing, like 0% capsular contracture, which I can only envy, really. I here, basically, when you talk about radiation, there's so many parameters to talk about, and we see different results of radiation in different places. We have a few centers here for radiation, really see the difference. In cases that you see capsular contracture, you did a reconstruction with alloderm, the patient was radiated, you do have capsular contracture. What would be your thoughts about the alloderm once you're inside and trying to do, would you take the alloderm out completely? Would you do capsulotomies on the alloderm?
So my inclination usually in a radiated patient who's not happy with the result and has bad capsular contracture is to go to an autologous flap. That's usually my gut, especially on those that were previously radiated and have capsular contracture, because the complication rates are less, and I know I can get them a good result that way. If they don't want that, I never take the alloderm out. I've cut through alloderm, I've done capsulotomies, capsulectomies, I've put new alloderm in at the second stage.